This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Adult content, frank safety discussions, and stories that might sound unbelievable. But believe me, every one of those stories is true. We didn't start the safety war, but we are going to fight to win it. For our families, for our communities, for our workplaces, and for our lives. This is Jim Posel from Safety Wars, and I wanted to thank everybody who reached out to me, mostly through social media, and told me what I should be covering here. What are they interested in, right? Why would I want to talk about very esoteric things? And I, as everyone knows, I'm a member of the prepper community. That's the 3 to 5% of Americans that have taken at least 5 minutes out of their day, 5 minutes out of their life, and said, what the hell am I going to do if there's a problem? So, what do we do here? Preparing for a flood. I went to ready.gov, downloaded their info, and we're going to talk about it and everything else. So, they basically have... Now, let's talk about this. You have to do the 3 A's. Assess, analyze, and act. That's what your whole thing is with this stuff. You have to assess what your issues are, analyze them, prepare, and then act when finally something happens. I didn't think that I would ever have an issue with floods. Personally, last year, we had the Safety Wars Studios, also known as Fallout Shelter Studio. I affectionately call it that. We had a flood because of Hurricane Ida. It took us about a year to recover from the flood, and that was only 3 inches of water. This isn't what you see out west and some other areas from down south where we have huge floods, storm surges, things of that nature. And guess what? Now you have a huge situation. We had a situation here where we never had a flood. Our neighbors never really had floods. A little bit of water, a little bit of seepage. No, never had an issue. I was down in the basement preparing for this broadcast, for this Safety Wars stuff, whatever episode it was. And what do you think happens? I do a great job, as always. I record the episode, as always. I hit upload, I hit this, I hit that, and I was sitting in my stool, right? I have a stool that I normally sit in for recording and where I can move around and everything. I put my feet on the ground. I had socks on I usually wear shoes, but this time I had socks. I put my feet down and I'm in water. I'm like, son of a gun. There's a little tiny crack. And I said, now we got a problem. I go out and call Mrs. Posel. Hey, honey, we got water. I'm down here with a shop vac. I'm shop vacuuming. And I went and I said, well, what do we have? I have my brand new washing machine and dryer. I go out in the backyard. I got a couple of cinder blocks from the old owner. I put everything up on cinder blocks so I don't have destroyed appliances. I'm blah, blah, blah. And we're starting, and after about 3 or 4 hours, we lose in the battle. We got as much as possible out, but we lost the battle. Safety Warrior was not good that day, believe me. And it took us roughly a year to recover from this. We had 3 inches of water. It's really impacted my business up until really recently, because now, having to put everything back, now I have a nice setup, better than ever, and we're set up to do what we need to do. That's my experience personally with a flood. I've never been involved in anything else, so I only have to go by what I read, what I see on TV, and stories from my many friends and listeners. So, what do you do? Yeah, right. This is right from ready.gov. You have 2 scenarios. Right? If you're under a flood warning, find shelter right away. That's what they say. What could floods be from? Anything, really. Weather events. It could be rain, snow, coastal storm surges, overflows of dams and other water systems. And it could be at any speed. It could be slow moving, fast moving. happening in the blink of an eye, happening over time here, right? And what are the big things, right? Power outages. We're talking power outages, disruption in transportation, and damage to buildings and landslides. Some of the stories I have come from Superstorm Sandy 10 years ago. Unbelievable. And what did we have with Superstorm Sandy? We had a very large storm. I don't think it was even really a hurricane, technically, but what happened was it was a very long-lasting storm, and it felt the effects from the Delaware, that area of Maryland, coming up the coast, into New Jersey, New York, all the way up in Orange County, really. And there are some good things that came out of it. All the counties up here came out with community emergency response teams. They were really pushing it after Superstorm Sandy. And I encourage you, when there's a community emergency response team in your area, to actually join it, number one. Number two is that it taught me a lesson in all this preparation. Because guess what? We were prepared for Superstorm Sandy where we lived. Not in this house where I am. In our old house, I tell you what, being a newlywed, I was a god for 2 weeks, right? Because we had all the preparations that we needed. What was our main issue there was Superstorm Sandy and the floods and everything. Sewage treatment plant got flooded out, and the water treatment plant got flooded out. We couldn't drink the water. We still had water, which means that we had enough to flush the toilets, and it was safe enough to take a shower in, but it wasn't safe enough to drink. That sort of thing. We also had the ability to evacuate to my in-laws in upstate New York. That would have been a very severe situation had we not had that. So that's one way. It's not, you may not be flooded, but where you get your utilities from, that might be flooded. Even power plants might be flooded and impacted. So what happens when that happens? You have no power. What do you need? Generator. This is right from FEMA, ready.gov. Stay off of fast-moving water, off bridges, over fast-moving water. I would say this is what I see. Every time I'm out in a flood or on the way home, a flooded area, things of that nature, I try not to drive in this stuff. What do you see? You see somebody in a vehicle. It could be a big truck. It could be a small car. They say, I can make it through that water. It doesn't look that deep. And what do you think happens? They drive in it, and before you know it, I didn't know a Corvette could float like that. Right? Back in the day, before smartphone, I used to see crazy stuff happen all the time. Wish I had photos. Evacuate if you're told to do so. So if you're told to evacuate, probably a very good idea to evacuate. Again, this is from FEMA, right? I'm not giving you advice here. I'm just going off of what the official advice is. Move to higher ground or a higher floor. That you need to be careful of. Higher ground, obviously. You're in your house, you can't evacuate. Move to a higher floor if possible. Problem is, people move to their attics often, and what do you think happens in the attic? They have no way out. So unless it's like a dire emergency, don't do that and stay where you are. Those are your decisions. What do you do with all this stuff? You personally, what can you do? Prepare, assess, analyze, and act. The AAAs, as I always say. Assess what your flood risks are. Is it your house flooding? Is it from a body of water, a river, a lake? Maybe you're at the bottom of a hill. Anything like that. Survive. So prepare now. Know your areas. Type of flood risk. Sign up for your community's emergency warning systems. I think most communities in the United States have a reverse 911 system. If flash flooding is a risk in your location, right? Monitor potential signs such as heavy rains. Learn and practice evacuation routes and shelter plans. If possible, identify where your bug out location is. Is it a shelter? Is it higher ground somewhere in your community, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? What resources am I going to have when I get there? This all goes into your bug out bag, what they call in the industry, where you have enough stuff for up to 2 or 3 days. Food, clothing, water, documents, any documents that you need. Insurance policies, credit cards, credit card bills, paperwork, things of that nature. Are you going to back it up to the cloud? Are you going to have it a hard copy? Today, you can back a lot of things up to the cloud. Barring any major catastrophe, it's still going to be there. Right? But hard copies are probably always best. And make sure everything is in one place. We're talking medical records, medication needs, doctors, pharmacy information, pharmacy RX numbers, prescription numbers, things of that nature. If you're eligible, get flood insurance. And important documents in a waterproof container to say, okay, protect your property. Where valuable items need to be moved to higher locations. And big thing, maintenance on the asset. Are your gutters cleaned? Do you have any impediments to water being drained off your property? Do you have valuables in your basement or lower floors that may have to go to an upper floor? Right, upper floors higher above the flood. During the flood, depending on where you are and the impact and the warning time of flooding, go to a safe location that you have already pre-identified. And I would communicate that to your loved ones and your friends and family, whatever is appropriate, where you're going. If told to evacuate, do so immediately. Listen to the weather stations, right? NOAA and other weather resources in your community. Do not walk through, swim, or drive through floodwaters. We understand driving through floodwaters now, all of a sudden your car is destroyed, and because you misjudged the depth of the water and everything else. But just moving through floodwaters physically. Right now, you don't know what's in that water. It could be contaminated. It could be sewage. It could be glutenol. It could be hazardous materials. It could be obstructing hazards under the water, like nails, tripping hazards. Well, you still have a nail, tripping hazards, things of that nature. You also have a biological hazard, right? Dirty water, biological hazard. So you avoid doing that. Stay off bridges and over fast-moving water. Realize that in a flood, I didn't do a good assessment back in the mid-2000s, where one of my routes to work, there was going over a bridge, the Delaware River by the Delaware Water Gap. And you go over that, water is normally 10, 15, 20 foot below that bridge. Right? Maybe more. I'm taking a guess there. Well, guess what? We had floods one time, torrential downpours, mid-2000s. That water was up to the bridge. Something to consider. Now, and then after the flood waters receded, I noticed that all of the houses along the river, that was 40-year flood, 45-year flood, meaning it had not occurred in 45 years, early 1970s. All the houses along the river were on stilts. And I was like, oh, I always wondered about that. That's because it flooded out. I was at the beginning of my career. So find out what your history is around your neighborhoods and everything else. If trapped in a building, go to its highest level, but you avoid the attic. Right? And go on the roof as a last resort. Listen to and be safer after. Right? Keep off the roads, except during emergencies. Be aware that snakes and other animals and other critters may come up. Don't think that because you're in the Northeast that you're not going to have a hazard of all different types with animals, whether they're snakes, reptiles, what have you. Be amazed what people keep in their house. And we're going to talk about generators and power losses elsewhere, but there's always a hazard of electrocution. Electricity and water do not mix very well because it gives you a clear path to ground where electricity wants to go, and you could get shocked. So that's what we're talking about with floods, and some of my thoughts and some of my experiences with floods. But what's the idea? You have to assess what is going on, what you might experience, and everything else with floods. And that's what. But not only floods, it's in the recovery afterwards. And remember, it's just things. We're talking about potentially your life of your loved ones, your friends, and in your community. You got to protect yourself and your community and your friends. Possessions are possessions. You'll get more. It's very upsetting. I lost a lot of stuff in our little flood here, but a lot of people lost a lot more than that. And that's something you need to prepare for ahead of time, and just have a plan and communicate it to whoever you're responsible for, whoever's appropriate. For Safety Wars, this is Jim Holzer.
In the professional safety community, communication and planning are just a few keys to your program's success. The question many practitioners have is, where do I start? Dr. Jay Allen, the creator of the Safety FM platform and host of the Rated R Safety Show, has built a global foundation to help you along the way. Go to safetyfm.com and listen to some of the industry's best and most involved professionals, including Blaine Hoffman with the Safety Pro, Sam Goodman with the Hop Nerd, Sheldon Primus with the Safety Consultant, Jim Pozell with Safety Wars, Emily Elrod with Unapologetically Bold, and many others. As individuals, we can do great things, but as a team, we become amazing. Dial into safetyfm.com today and surround yourself with a powerful force of knowledge and support.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.